Okay, let's unpack this. April 12th, 2025. A Ukrainian F-16 fighter jet is reported lost.
Hmm.
Now, for those of you following the ongoing situation closely, especially, maybe with an eye on your UPSC exams, this isn't just some fleeting headline.
No, absolutely not.
This is the second F-16 Ukraine has lost since they started flying them back in August last year.
Right.
But here's where it gets, well, really interesting. Acting President Zelenskyy acknowledged this publicly and incredibly fast, like within hours.
Yeah, the speed of that acknowledgement it's quite striking, isn't it? Especially when you think about the usual military protocols for confirming losses.
Exactly. Normally there's a bit of a delay, right? Verification, internal stuff.
Precisely. So that swiftness, it suggests something deliberate was going on there, maybe managing the story, maybe sending a signal.
That's what we thought. So we've dived into our sources for this. Official Ukrainian Air Force reports Zelensky's own post on X.com, the Russian Ministry of Defense's statement, and yeah, even some of those early sort of unverified eyewitness bits that popped up on a Telegram channel.
Right, the usual mix in these situations.
So our mission today, for you listening, especially if you're trying to get your head around current events for UPSC prep, is to go way beyond just the headlines. We want to really understand the different layers here, the loss of such an advanced plane like the F-16 in this conflict.
Absolutely. We're looking at the what, sure, but really digging into the why and the bigger picture. For anyone studying strategic dimensions, international relations, understanding the details of an incident like this, it gives you real insight into the conflict's dynamics.
Okay, so let's walk through the timeline. Social media starts buzzing, say, around 1:000 p.m. Kyiv time.
Yeah, bits and pieces leaking out.
Then just over an hour later, 2:42 p.m., boom, Zelenskyy confirms it, confirms the death of the pilot, Captain Pavlo Ivanov, and the loss of the F-16.
Which is remarkably quick.
And the official Ukrainian Air Force statement, that doesn't land until much later that evening, 9:23 p.m. That's quite a gap.
It really is. And like you said, that early confirmation from Zelenskyy himself, it feels almost preemptive.
Yeah. So it makes you wonder, what was the message he was trying to send? Get ahead of bad info.
Wow.
Or something more strategic?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We need to keep that in mind as we go.
Definitely. Okay, let's talk about the pilot, Captain Pavlo Ivanov. Tragically, only 26 years old.
Yeah, very young.
But what jumped out from the reports was his background. He flew Su-25s before moving to the F-16.
Right, the Su-25 Frogfoot.
Those are really different aircraft, aren't they? Fundamentally different.
Oh, completely. The Su-25 is a tough subsonic ground attack jet. Think close air support, low and slow.
Right.
The F-16, well, that's a sophisticated supersonic multi-role fighter. Different era, different capabilities, different way of flying altogether.
So that transition, the sources suggested happened because, well, they needed pilots for the F-16s fast.
Which makes sense given the pressure they're under. But it's not a typical career path, moving from a dedicated attack jet straight to something like an F-16.
So less time in the F-16 cockpit, potentially.
Almost certainly. Less time, less specific experience compared to someone trained on it from scratch. That inherently increases the risk, especially in complex combat situations.
Okay, so the news hits, and straight away people start guessing what happened. That Telegram channel you mentioned.
Yeah.
It had an eyewitness report from near Sumy, someone claiming they saw a Russian missile near an F-16.
Right, and that immediately points fingers towards a long-range engagement, possibly the R-37 missile.
Explain the R-37 a bit. That's a serious piece of kit, right?
It absolutely is. Launched from Russian fighters like the Su-35, Su-57, or the MiG-31BM, often from high altitude. Its range is, well, reported up to 300 kilometers.
300 kilometers, wow.
Yeah, it's designed to hit high-value targets like AWACS or other fighters from a long way off, keeping the launching plane safer. So definitely a plausible cause for a shoot-down near the border.
And initially, the S-400 SAM system, the surface-to-air missile, that was seen as maybe less likely. Why was that?
Well, the thinking there, generally, is that Western intelligence keeps a pretty close eye on the locations of major strategic assets like the S-400 batteries.
Okay.
It's a big system, relatively trackable. So the initial thought might have been that a surprise attack from an S-400, one they didn't know about or that had just moved, was perhaps less probable than an air-to-air shot from deep inside Russia.
Right, so they figured they probably knew where the S-400s were.
That would likely have been the initial assumption, yeah. The S-400 is a major threat, designed for various targets, but its effectiveness depends on its radar seeing the target. Knowing where those radars are is key for pilots.
But then you have those less reliable eyewitness bits, people saying the F-16 was being chased by a missile.
Yeah, that description often crops up, but it doesn't really fit the physics of a long-range missile shot coming from Russian territory.
How so?
Well, if the missiles launch from far away, inside Russia, towards a plane near the border, the geometry is likely head-on, or maybe from the side. Not really a tail chase.
Ah, okay.
Eyewitnesses see fast things in the sky under stress. They might not accurately perceive the complex dynamics of air combat. So while the R-37 was a possibility, these ground reports needed careful handling.
Gotcha. And then the next day, Russia's Ministry of Defense steps up. They put out a statement claiming they shot down the F-16, plus some other stuff.
Right. Standard procedure, claim the success.
But notably, they don't say how they did it or exactly where. No mention of the weapon system.
And that's also pretty typical. They claim the kill, but keeping the details vague. Well, it keeps Ukraine guessing about their tactics and exact deployments.
And serves a propaganda purpose, too, I guess.
Absolutely. Allows them to score points internally and externally. Regardless of the nitty-gritty details, you always have to take these claims with a grain of salt and wait for more evidence.
Crucial point, yeah. Okay, so to figure out what really might have happened, we need to understand how Ukraine is actually using these F-16s. There aren't that many, are there?
No, not at all. The estimates suggest maybe 16 total in country, perhaps only 6 to 8 actually ready for combat ops at any one time.
Wow, that's a really small number.
It is. And that highlights why losing even one is such a significant blow for them. Every single airframe counts.
So what are these few planes actually doing?
Primarily two things, based on reports. Air defense trying to intercept incoming Russian cruise missiles like the KH-101s and Gullivers.
Right, protecting cities and infrastructure.
Exactly. And then occasional strike missions against ground targets using precision weapons.
And for those ground attacks, what are they using? We mentioned small diameter bombs, SDBs, and JDAMers.
Correct. These are guided bombs that glide towards their target after release.
And their range depends on how high the F-16 drops them.
Precisely. The higher the release altitude could be, anywhere from, say, 10,000 feet up to 40,000 feet, the further the bomb can glide.
Okay. And then there's the other weapon you hear about, the AGM-88 HARM. That's different, right? Anti-radar.
Totally different beast. HARM stands for High-Speed Anti-Radiation Missile.
Yeah.
It homes in on enemy radar signals like those used by air defense systems.
And it's fast.
Very fast. It's a powered missile, not a glide bomb. It accelerates rapidly right after launch, often appearing to shoot ahead of the aircraft that fired it.
So that launch profile, someone on the ground could easily mistake that. Think it's a missile chasing the F-16?
It's definitely possible. Seeing that bright rocket motor ignite and the missile streak away could absolutely be misinterpreted from the ground, especially if the plane itself is maneuvering.
Okay, that makes sense. So bringing it to the actual fatal flight, to use those glide bombs effectively near the border, the tactic is often to fly in low, under the radar, right?
Yeah, stay low to avoid early detection.
But then, to release the bomb and get that range, they have to climb, pop up.
Exactly. They need to execute a climb maneuver to gain the altitude and speed needed for the weapon release.
And that moment, that climb, that's when they become visible.
Vulnerable. That's the danger zone. As they climb, they expose themselves much more significantly to enemy radar detection, including those long-range systems like the S-400.
So ideally, pilots plan this pop-up point carefully, trying to stay outside the known kill zones of things like the S-400.
That's the plan, absolutely. You pick your release basket to minimize exposure.
But it seems like on April 12th, Captain Ivanov's F-16 somehow ended up inside one of those S-400 engagement zones.
That appears to be the most likely scenario leading to the loss, yes. That high-altitude moment needed for the JDAM or SDB release put him right where an S-400 could potentially engage him.
Okay, so that leads us to basically two main possibilities for why he ended up in that zone.
Right. It boils down to two potential causes.
One, tragic pilot error. Maybe misjudging the climb, the timing, the location during that high-pressure release maneuver.
It's always a possibility in combat aviation.
Yeah.
A slight miscalculation under stress can have fatal consequences.
Or two, an intelligence failure, meaning they didn't have accurate, up-to-the-minute information on where exactly the Russian air defenses, specifically maybe an S-400 battery, were positioned or active.
And the second possibility, the intelligence failure, that carries much heavier implications, doesn't it?
Yeah. Pilot error is, sadly, a known risk, but bad intelligence suggests a systemic problem.
Exactly. A failure to know where the threats are. That undermines everything. It puts pilots, and expensive aircraft at much greater risk across the board.
And this loops us right back to Zelensky's super fast announcement. If it was an intelligence failure, particularly if, say, the U.S. or NATO partners weren't providing timely or complete ISR data.
And ISR is intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance data. Basically, the eyes and ears, satellites, drones, signals intelligence that tell you where the enemy is and what they're doing. Critical stuff for planning missions near the border.
Right. So if that data was flawed or maybe delayed, could Zelensky's quick public statement have been a political signal? A way of highlighting the consequences of not getting the best, most current intel?
It's certainly a plausible interpretation, a very public way of saying, look what happens when we don't have what we need. It raises questions about the flow and quality of intelligence sharing between Ukraine and its allies.
Definitely something to think about, especially for our listeners analyzing the geopolitics here for UPSC. Is this a one-off, or does it point to bigger issues in intel sharing?
Good question. Because when you step back and look at the bigger picture, this loss just highlights how fragile Ukraine's F-16 capability really is.
Yeah, the small numbers we talked about.
Small numbers, the constant need for spares, for maintenance, for enough trained pilots and ground crews.
And all while facing very sophisticated Russian air defenses.
Exactly. It's an incredibly challenging environment.
Yeah.
And if you add potential gaps or delays in crucial intelligence on top of all that,
it makes an already difficult job almost impossible.
it severely hampers their ability to use these jets effectively and could really impact the wider war effort.
Okay, so let's try and pull the threads together. We've got the loss of the second F-16, Zelensky's unusually fast confirmation, conflicting initial reports, the Russian claim without specifics.
Right.
And it seems to narrow down to two main scenarios. Either a pilot error during that risky weapon release climb.
Or, potentially more worryingly, an intelligence failure, not knowing precisely where a Russian S-400 system was waiting.
And that potential intelligence gap, that's the real kicker, isn't it?
It really is. It raises big questions about the support Ukraine is getting, the timeliness of it, and how that affects their ability to fight effectively in the air.
So for everyone listening, especially those deep in UPSC prep, think about what this single incident tells us. We've got advanced tech, complex tactics, the human element potential error, and crucially, the absolute reliance on good, timely intelligence. What does this reveal about how modern wars are fought and maybe how they can be lost? It really forces you to consider those strategic impacts we discussed, how one event connects to the whole picture.
Absolutely. And this kind of detailed analysis, looking at the interplay of tech, human factors, strategy, intel, it's directly relevant for understanding current affairs for mains and gives context for prelims too.
This specific incident, as reported and analyzed by our Asian Times, really serves as a potent case study.
It does. It shows the immense challenges of air warfare in a contested, high-threat environment.
Exactly. So if you found this deep dive, drawing on the Our Asian Times report, useful for your understanding, please do give us a like, subscribe for more analysis like this, and definitely leave a comment. Any questions, any thoughts you have on this incident or its implications, we'd love to hear them. We really value the engagement.